Aloha students, I'm United States Congressman Ed Case, and behind me is the United States Congress on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and I'm coming to you from your Congress today. I represent Hawaii's 1st Congressional District, which covers almost all of Oahu, all the way from Makapu'u Point in Hawaii Kai over on the east side, all the way through downtown Honolulu, up to Mililani, and down through Waipahu to Ewa Beach, Kapolei, all the way out to Ko'olina. 730,000 people live in my district, and the other 730,000 people live in Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, which is the rest of the state. And I, together with my colleague in the 2nd Congressional District, Congressman Kaili'i Kahele, we represent you in the United States House of Representatives. So let's start with the basics. And the basics are set by the most important document in our entire history. Our Declaration of Independence, of course, was a critical document where we said to Great Britain and to the world that we were our own country and we would govern ourselves. But the document I'm referring to now is our United States Constitution, which we passed and ratified in 1789, all of those years ago. And we have lived under that Constitution ever since. And that Constitution sets the ground rules for how we're going to govern ourselves. And so let's talk a little bit about what our Constitution says in terms of our federal government, which is the government that governs all of our country. And we're all subject to our federal government. Now we have a state government in Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, and the state of Hawaii is responsible for taking care of the state. And we also have county governments, so the city and county of Honolulu. But the city and county of Honolulu and the state governments are all subject to our national government and our national laws. And the Constitution says how we set that up. So what does the Constitution say? Well, it says that our government is made up of 3 separate, independent, and co-equal branches of government. And why did we do it that way? Well, we wanted them to be separate, so each of them had a responsibility. We wanted them to be independent so that none of those could tell the other one what to do. And we wanted them to be co-equal, which means that each of those branches of government has an equal role in the running of our government. We also wanted to set up something called a system of checks and balances. And you've heard that, and you'll hear that a lot more throughout your lives. Checks and balances. And what does that really mean? It means that each of our branches of government is responsible for taking a watch and look and an oversight at the other branches of government so that they don't get out of control. Because when we set our country up, we were concerned about a centralization of power in one person, one dictator, in our case, one king, who dictated exactly what was going to happen in our country for better or worse. And so we wanted to say, look, we have to set up a government that works, but we want each of the parts of our government to be watching over the others. Now, what are those 3 branches of government? Well, they are the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So, of course, since I'm in the United States Congress, I think that my branch is the most important, the legislative branch. And our job is to legislate. Our job is to make the laws by which we are all going to live. And we have very specific duties in terms of making the laws, but that's basically what our job is. The heads of the legislative branch are people like me, the elected members of Congress, because the legislative branch is Congress. And so as a member of Congress, I am responsible to discharge the duties of the legislative branch. Now the executive branch is charged with implementing and administering our laws and also making other efforts on behalf of our country, especially in the area of our armed services and our foreign relations, our relations with other countries. And the executive branch is run by the President of the United States. And then the judicial branch is our courts. And in this context, the judicial branch is responsible for making sure that both of us, the executive branch and the legislative branch, are doing our jobs. The judicial branch is headed by the United States Supreme Court. And they are the ones to which we take ultimately all of our disputes, and they're responsible for saying what the Constitution means and for making sure that we're doing our job and making sure that the citizens of our country are heard with grievances. Now let me dig down a little bit more on the legislative branch, the United States Congress. There are two parts of the United States Congress, the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. Now, in each of the Senate and the House, the members of the Senate and the House are elected by popular vote, by your vote, by our districts back home. And you vote for who you want your representative to be in Congress, in the Senate or the House, to help with our responsibilities here on your behalf. Now, over on the Senate side, we have 100 members, 100 senators, and they serve for 6-year terms. And in the House, we have 435 voting members, and we serve for 2-year terms. Now, a difference between the Senate and the House is that in the U.S. Senate, we have 2 senators per state, regardless of how big that state is, how big that population is, or how small. 2 senators per state. Well, over on the House side, we have the number of representatives for that state depending on the population of the state. And so in Hawaii's case, we have 2 members of Congress. But in the case of states like California and New York, they have over 50 members. Now why is it? Why did we set it up that way? Well, we basically wanted to say that in one of the houses of Congress, we would provide for representation by the overall population of our country. After all, the argument was New York should have a few more representatives since they have more people. But then the smaller states said, well, but you're going to leave us out and you're just going to pick on us and isolate us. And so what the folks that put our Constitution together did was they said, okay, well, over on the Senate side, we're going to have it by state regardless of population. And so this is a system, if you want to think about it, as checks and balances inside Congress itself. And so in all, we have 535 members in the Senate and the House, and we are all responsible for getting the job done for you. Now, I talked a lot about legislating here, and that's my number one job here. My number one job is to help with the laws of our country. Now, how does that actually happen? Well, first of all, one basic rule is that only a member of Congress can propose a law or a change in the law. So I, as your representative, can, and I do, introduce bills, which are proposed laws, and I fight for those bills, and I have to decide on what other people think about them, and in some cases persuade my colleagues that they're a good idea. So a lot of Congress is a little bit like your lives. A lot of Congress is about developing relationships with your colleagues, of friendship, of trust, of mutual respect, and I help my colleagues where I can, and I hope they'll help me in Hawaii where they can as well. Once the bill is introduced, that's not the end of the day. First of all, it has to be studied. We have to take a look at the pros and cons. We have to open it up for the public to comment. Because if we just introduce it ourselves and that's all she wrote, then we are not including our constituents in the process of governance. So we have committees in Congress. These committees are members of Congress that come together for specific reasons, and they focus on various areas, kind of like experts and specialists. And so here in the House, for example, we have a committee on foreign affairs, which is responsible for our country's laws that relate to our world. We have a committee on natural resources that I'm on, and that's responsible for taking care of our environment. And then we have a very important committee called Appropriations, which I'm also on, and Appropriations is responsible for spending our money. So where does all of this money go? How do we spend it? And that obviously is a committee that has a lot of influence in Congress because we need to fund many of these efforts. Now, the committees study the bill and they decide whether to send it along. And if they approve of a bill, then the bill comes to the full House for a vote. Now, this is also true in the Senate. Everything I talked about is also true in the Senate, and a bill can start in either the House or the Senate. But here's the rule. The bill has to pass the full House on a majority vote or the full Senate on a majority vote in order for it to go to the other chamber. And it has to pass 2 chambers in exactly the same form. Now the other chamber, the other body, the House or the Senate, they can change it if they want. And they can say, well, you know, I kind of like the idea, but I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction. So I'm going to change it a little bit. And if they pass it that way, then we have to set up another committee called the conference, and they try to work out the differences and see if they can get to one bill. If they do, then it has to pass both House and Senate again in exactly the same form. Why? Because there can't be any confusion about the bill and the proposed law. And then there's one more step, and that is that the president has to say it's okay. So the president has to sign that bill. And if the president signs it, it's law. So it's a long road that you've got to go through. And it should be a long road, because when we make a law, it's going to impact 350 million people throughout our country, and in many cases, way beyond our country and the rest of the world. So we should be careful about what we do. Now, there's one other thing to tell you, and that is the president can also say the president doesn't like that bill, and the president can then, what we call, veto the bill. So the president can say, I don't accept it. Then two things can happen. The first thing that can happen is the bill is dead. But the second thing that can happen is we get another chance at it in what we call an override vote. And an override vote is basically saying, we get that you don't like this, Mr. President, so far, and I hope this changes someday, it will be Mr. President now, and it has been. Pretty soon it'll be Ms. President, I'm sure. But the point is that the override vote gives us an opportunity to say we're going to do it anyway. But that has to be by more than just 50%. It's got to be a supermajority. So there's a system of checks and balances built in there as well. So long process in Congress to make laws, to implement laws. But again, these are important duties that I have on behalf of you and our country. Well, I guess I like to start with talking a little bit about the parts of my job. And there are really three basic parts. The first part is my national responsibilities under our Constitution, and I've already talked to you a lot about that. How do we make laws? How do I do what needs to be done on the national level for our country? What do we do about our relations with Europe or Asia? How do we help our folks throughout our country with education or healthcare? These are areas where I'm acting as one of many members of Congress, all for our country. And so that's my constitutional duty. And I've already talked a little bit about what I do along those lines. I spend a lot of time talking about proposed legislation. I spend a lot of time trying to develop and implement the legislation that I want. And I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what my colleagues are trying to do too, and whether I agree with it. So that's the first part of my job. The second part of my job is much more focused on Hawaii, because I'm one of only 4 members of Congress from Hawaii up here, and we in Hawaii have, of course, major needs in all kinds of areas. And sometimes they're very unique to Hawaii. Sometimes people don't understand what it means to be an island state 2,500 miles from the continent. Sometimes they don't understand our incredible diversity that is our gift, but yet also creates its own sets of challenges. And so my job is to make sure that our federal government is helping our Hawaii specifically, and not just helping it, but sometimes our federal government means well, but it does things that sometimes unknowingly can hurt Hawaii. And so a lot of this is working with my colleagues and with the president and the members of the executive branch to make sure that our laws and our funding are carried out in a way that actually does help us in Hawaii. And then the third part of my job we call casework. And casework is my obligation to help you and your family with your own individual concerns. Because every one of my constituents has a right to come to me and say, I have a problem and I need your help. I have a problem. Not our country needs a problem, not our Hawaii needs a problem, but I have a problem. And these can be all kinds of problems. I get all kinds of requests for assistance in my office. Immigration, Social Security, taking care of our veterans are some of the main ones. During COVID, lots of questions and needs for assistance on getting assistance to individual people. Taxes is another area. But sometimes it's not so much that I can help, but I can at least get people to the right place for somebody that can help. So I get calls in my office about why wasn't my garbage picked up today? Or why are there so many potholes on my street? I don't have any direct responsibility for your garbage or the potholes. That's the state and county governments. But I can at least get an answer for you and get a identification. And so these are the three buckets of my job. And every single day, I'm working in one of those three buckets in some ways. An important part to note here is that I don't do this alone. I have a staff, a great staff in both Honolulu, where I have an office, and of course, here in Washington, D.C., where I have an office. And my staff are experts that know Congress, know Hawaii, and know how to help. And so, you know, any team needs a good solid foundation, a good solid working ethic, needs to know what you're doing, and my team has that, and so I'm really grateful to them. And they help me every single day to get through each day, each month, each year. So my day is kind of all of the above with my staff and with others. And a lot of my day, every day, is talking with you and others that I represent about your concerns, about how we're going to fix your concerns. And that's where I get a lot of my information, because, you know, I'm just one person and I'm living a pretty complicated life. But my life may be different from many other people's lives, and they may be having experiences and needs and concerns that are not directly mine, but I still have to represent them. And so I need input, I need advice, I need guidance, I need information to make the right decisions. And every day I have many meetings with constituents. By the way, I've used the word constituents many times. And for your benefit, constituents is the people that I represent, the people that have voted me into office, the people that I have to help, directly help in Congress. And I also say, by the way, that in my view, I represent all of my constituents, all of the people in my district, regardless of whether they voted for me, regardless of whether they agree with me. Many people didn't vote for me. Most people did, and that's why I'm here, but many people didn't. People don't always agree. We can't find 100% agreement. But am I responsible for representing you? Yes, I am. Am I responsible for helping where I can? Yes, I'm responsible for that. And so I try very hard to keep in touch. It's harder to do when I'm in Washington, D.C. Done a lot of Zoom over the last couple of years of COVID. And of course, I spend about half my year or more here in Washington doing my work. But when I'm home, I try to do it in person. I try to get out around my communities. I go to organizations. I come to schools to talk story with you and other students. I go to businesses, to churches. I do my own meetings so that I can invite people in to talk story with me. And in these ways, I try to stay in touch. I try to always be up to speed on what the needs of my district and my folks are so that I can do the job here. Now, the other thing I try to do is provide you and everybody that I represent with as much information as I possibly can on what I'm doing, the issues that I'm facing, the way I'm thinking about the issues that I am having to deal with, both nationally and back home in Hawaii, and also to provide the easiest possible way for folks to get in touch with me and to follow what I'm doing. And so I do that, the central place that I do that is off of my website, which is case.house.gov, and you can go there, and that's the kind of the entry to my office. There's information there on me, on my committees, on my activities. I do newsletters and press releases frequently that I try to tell people what I'm up to. I do full social media pretty much daily, all of the social media platforms, or at least most of them. And you are welcome to go there to learn about me, to learn about your government, to learn about the issues we're dealing with. You're welcome to go on my social media to kind of follow me on a day-to-day basis. And so I really encourage you to do that. Also, on my website is a way for you to tell me what you think. And you can email me, that's the best way. There's an easy form there. I get tens of thousands of communications from my constituents every month, every year. And I try to answer as much as I can so that if you're going to tell me what you think or have a question, I feel that I should answer you and tell you what's going on and try to answer your question wherever I can. I get many communications from students just like you. And every single time I get those communications, I always say thank you. Thank you so much for letting me know what you think. It's really, really helpful to me. What does this all have to do with you today as students? How can you be part of your government? How can you be a part of our democracy? I think the first thing I'd say to you is you're already a part of your government. You're already a part of our democracy. You are part of our larger national ohana. You're part of our Hawaii ohana. And whether you have actively participated or not, we are all part of our government. Let's not forget one basic point here, which is what our founders set up all those years ago. And that is that it is our government. It is not some remote thing that is separate from us. It is we the people have done this, and this is how we're going to govern ourselves. And so we're all part of this, and we all should participate, because the more people that are part of our government, the better our government will be. I don't like the idea of a government that only 2% of the folks in the country are really actively participating in. That's dangerous from my perspective. Imagine that you had a student government and nobody was part of it. You would probably think that that government may not represent you very well. But if you're part of it, then you can influence your government. You can be a person that contributes to your government in your own way. From a voting perspective, the rules are, of course, that you have to be 18 years old or older to vote in our country and in our state and for your members of Congress. But you can sign up for voting before you're 18. You can sign up at 16, as a matter of fact, so that you're in line to pretty much automatically be good to go to vote when you get to be 18. So I would encourage you to do that. But you don't have to wait, of course, before 18 to actually participate. As I've already talked about, you can send me a letter today. You can come to my community meetings and tell me what you think. You can ask questions about current events, and you can share your views with others. You can go home tonight with your friends and your family and say, let's talk about what our country is facing today. As I tape this to you, our country has a very, very serious challenge in Ukraine, with Russia invading Ukraine. That's on the other side of the world from Hawaii. But yes, it does affect us in Hawaii. And we should all talk about that, and we should all talk about how we think that's wrong, I hope. But the important thing is to have that discussion, to have your government be part of your everyday lives, because you will be responsible not only for helping us today, but especially as you move on in your lives, you will be responsible in your own times for leading our country, our state, our communities as well. And so this is the time to start to get involved. Well, that's a tough question because I've had a lot of great teachers in my life, and not all of them in school, by the way. I had one of my best teachers ever was the first person I really worked for full-time, who was a United States Congressman from Hawaii. His name was Spark Matsunaga, and I went to work for him when I was 22 years old, right here in the U.S. Congress. In fact, his office was literally 100 feet from where I'm taping this. And so he was a great teacher, and he influenced my life. But my education, my formal education was a great one. I was born and raised in Hilo, And I went through the public school system in Hilo until the end of 6th grade, and then I went to Hawaii Preparatory Academy, private school in Waimea on Hawaii Island, all the way through high school. And then I went to college and law school on the mainland. And all the way through I had incredible teachers, but I remember two in particular. The first was a woman named Nora Nabeta, who was my teacher in Waiakea Kai Elementary School in Hilo. And I was pretty young at the time. I was maybe 3rd grade or something like that. But I think what Ms. Nabeta taught me was to be curious about life. She always was one to ask why, or make you ask why. She always exposed me to many different things. She challenged me. And I think that that's an important lesson, because you don't learn by just being kind of passive about things and just letting it flow to you. You learn by thinking about things. You learn by being challenged. You learn by facing situations that you may not make sense to you in the beginning, but they make sense to you if you work at it. And you learn by teachers that guide you through that process. And she did a darn good job of that, so I remember her. The second one I remember is a guy named Paul Knopf. He was my teacher in 10th and 11th grade at HPA, which is Hawaii Preparatory Academy. And he was my English teacher, and I learned a lot about life just the way he taught about books and reading. So we would study books that you are studying today. But we wouldn't just read the books. We would talk about what the books meant, and what was going on in that person's life. What were the challenges that person was facing, and how did that person reconcile? And that was enough learning. But I'll tell you one thing about Mr. Knopf. It was a troubled time in my life where I was trying to find my way. And I was not a very good student for Mr. Knopf. I probably gave him a lot of trouble. In fact, I know I gave him a lot of trouble, and today I regret that. But you know what he did? He understood somehow. And one day he said, "Hey, Ed, let's go for a walk." And he said, "Hey, what's happening?" And see, I'm choking up because he did make that difference. But it was a time when I was struggling for answers myself, and I felt that he really cared. And he thought that I had potential, both inside and outside the classroom, although I don't think I got an A from him. Got a few A's later on, but he helped me on my path. So, as you sit there, hopefully listening to what I'm kind of trying to explain to you about our government, about our country, about your obligations, your responsibilities, your opportunities in our country. I also hope you will take a moment to think about the people that taught you, including your current teachers, and realize that they care, that they're trying to prepare you for life, and that your opportunities in this country are what you make of them, but we all need you to be a part of our country. So thank you so much for listening, and aloha from Capitol Hill.